The receipt stayed on the kitchen counter for 3 days. Nora didn't move it. She didn't fold it back up, didn't tuck it away in a drawer, didn't throw it in the bin where it would have been easier to pretend it had never existed. She left it there, flat and still, next to the coffee maker, where she would see it every morning when she woke up and every evening when she came home. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because some part of her understood that the moment she moved it, she would have to decide what it meant. And she wasn't ready yet. She wasn't ready for what she already knew. The name on the back of that receipt was Claire. She had said the name aloud once, alone in her apartment, the night she found it. Stood in her hallway with her coat still on and her grocery bag still in her hand, and said it quietly into the empty room, the way you say a word in a foreign language for the first time, carefully, listening to the shape of it. Claire. 2 letters in from the start, and she had already felt the words settle into her chest like cold water. She had not called Daniel that night. She had not called him the next morning either, or the evening after that. She had gone to work. She had made her coffee. She had watered her plants and answered her emails, and sat across from her colleague Priya at lunch and listened to a whole conversation about weekend plans. And she had smiled at the right moments and said the right things. And the entire time, there was a receipt on her kitchen counter with a name that wasn't hers. This was the part no one tells you about. Not the confrontation, not the crying, not the moment of reckoning. No one tells you about the in-between. The quiet, ordinary days that happen inside the knowing before you are ready to do anything with it. The way life keeps going, coffee, emails, lunch, smile while something inside you is sitting very still. In a room you've locked from the inside, waiting. Nora was very good at waiting. She had been waiting, in one way or another, for most of her life. She had waited to feel safe enough to speak. Had waited to feel certain enough to trust. Had waited, with careful and quiet patience, for the world to show her that the things she felt were real and reasonable and worth the space they took up. She was done waiting for that particular permission, but she was not done waiting altogether. She needed 3 days with that receipt. She needed 3 mornings of seeing it there, flat and ordinary and devastating, before she could pick it up and hold it and know with every cell in her body, with the deep animal certainty that lives below, thought what she was going to do next. On the 3rd evening, she picked it up. She looked at it for a long time. The restaurant name, the date in November, the 2 sets of dishes, the 2 glasses of wine, the small note in a stranger's handwriting, and below it, in ink that had bled slightly into the paper, Claire. She set the receipt down. She went to her bookshelf. She stood in front of it with her arms crossed against her chest, looking at the spines, the ones that had made her cry on the left, the ones that had made her feel understood in the middle, the ones that had made her brave on the right. She reached out and touched the spine of one of the brave ones. An old book, worn at the corners, the kind that has been read until it knows you back. She didn't pull it from the shelf. She just stood there with her fingers against it. Then she went to the kitchen, folded the receipt carefully along its original crease, and put it in the inside pocket of her journal. The dark green one. The one with the 4 words she had written a week ago in the middle of a blank page. And then she called Daniel. He answered on the 2nd ring, the way he always did, quickly, easily, with that warm and practiced readiness that she had once found so reassuring and now saw with terrible clarity for what it was. She said, "I found something in my coat." She said, "A receipt from November. From a Saturday in November, when you told me you were visiting your brother." There was a pause. Not long. Just a breath, just the smallest recalibration. And then he said, "Nora." Just her name. The way people say a name when they are buying time. The way people say a name when what they mean is, "Let me decide how much you already know before I decide what to tell you." She waited. He said, "It's not what you think." And she thought, there it is. That sentence, the oldest sentence in the world, the sentence that has never once, in the history of its speaking, been followed by something true. She said, "Tell me what it is then." And so he told her. Not all of it. She understood, even as he spoke, that she was not receiving the truth. She was receiving the version of the truth that had been constructed quickly, in the space of a breath, to do the least possible damage. She was receiving the managed version, the edited version, and she sat there and listened to it, and she noticed with a clarity that surprised her, that felt almost like calm, how practiced it sounded, how fluent, how much it resembled, in its texture and its pacing, every other explanation he had ever given her. He was very good with words. She had known this from the beginning. She had once loved it about him, that ease, that fluency, the way he could find the right thing to say, and say it as if it cost him nothing. She had mistaken it, in the beginning, for depth. She understood now that fluency and depth are not the same thing. That some people learn to speak beautifully precisely because they have learned that beautiful speaking costs less than honest silence. He spoke for several minutes. She listened, and when he was done, she said, "I see." He said, "Nora, please, can we talk about this properly? Can I come over?" She thought about this. She thought about what it would look like him in her apartment, with her terracotta rugs, and her bookshelves, and her plants in the window, in the space she had built with great care and great intention, him in the space that was hers. She said, "No." He said, "You're not being fair." And there it was again. Fair. As if fairness were the question. As if the question were about her behavior and not his. She said, "I'll call you when I'm ready to talk." And she hung up. She sat very still in the silence that followed. She had expected to cry. She had braced for it, had felt it coming the way you feel weather coming, that low pressure in the chest. But the tears didn't come. Not then. What came instead was something she had no precise name for, a kind of vast and windswept quiet, like standing on a high place after the storm has passed. Everything stripped down. Everything visible. She thought about the morning of the cold coffee, the gray sky, the weight in her chest she couldn't name. She understood it now. She had always understood it. She had just spent 18 months choosing not to. The crying came later, not that night, but the night after, suddenly, and without warning, at 10 in the evening, while she was washing dishes. She was washing a bowl and she set it down in the drying rack, and she stood at the sink, and she cried the way she had needed to cry for months fully, without managing it, without checking whether it was the appropriate volume, without asking herself if she was being too much. She cried for the relationship she had believed she was in, and for the one she had actually been in, and for the distance between those two things, and for the time she had spent in that distance not knowing. She cried for the version of herself she had let become smaller, the self that had stopped noticing, stopped writing, stopped taking up her rightful space in rooms where she had every right to be present. And then she dried her hands on the yellow dish towel, the one with the embroidered daisies she had bought for herself on a Tuesday when no one was watching, and she blew her nose, and she put the kettle on, and she went and sat on her sofa with a cup of tea and her dark green journal. She opened it to a new page. She wrote for an hour. She wrote everything she had not allowed herself to feel, everything she had smoothed and managed and translated and set aside. She wrote about the dinner party, and the brunch, and the eggs Benedict, and the small, patient explanations of who she was offered to rooms full of people she hadn't needed explained to. She wrote about the word difficult, and the word particular, and the word a lot, and what those words had done to her, not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, consistently, in the way that weather changes a landscape, reshaping it so gradually that you only notice when you look at an old photograph and think, when did that change? She wrote, "I was not difficult. I had preferences. I had opinions. I had a self that required a certain quality of space to exist in, and that is not a malfunction. That is not something that needs correcting." She wrote, "I made myself smaller to fit into a space that was always going to be too small, and the person holding the walls was never going to tell me that, because the smallness was the point." She sat back and looked at what she had written. The tea had gone cold. She didn't mind. She closed the journal and held it in both hands, the way you hold something you've been carrying for a long time and have finally set down in the right place. Outside, the city made its sounds. A train, distant. Someone's music from 2 floors up. The specific creak of the old building adjusting to the cold. Nora sat in her own apartment, in the home she had built with great care, surrounded by her books, organized by feeling, and her plants in the window, and her terracotta rugs, and the pale winter-thin light, and she breathed. Just breathed. This was the darkness. This the crying at the sink, the receipt in the journal, the managed story on the phone, and the terrible fluency of a person who had never meant to be truly known. This was the lowest floor of it. She knew that about herself, had always known that about herself. She knew when she had hit bottom, not because of noise, but because of this particular quality of quiet. This particular kind of still. She had been here before, not in this form, not with this person, but in this specific emotional geography, the place where everything false has been stripped away, and you are left with what is real and what is yours. She was here now. And she realized slowly, carefully, the way you test weight on ice, not afraid. That surprised her. She had expected fear. She had expected the particular vertigo of a woman who has organized her life around something that has just disappeared. She had expected to feel untethered, groundless, the way she had felt in past unravelings, like a boat cut loose from its mooring, drifting. But she didn't feel that. She felt, instead, like the mooring itself, like something that had always been there, solid and sure and fixed, that had simply been obscured for a while by something tied to it. And now that thing was gone, and she was still there. She had always been there. The thought was so quiet, she almost missed it. But she didn't miss it. She let it land. She opened her journal again and added 2 more lines below what she had already written. She wrote, "I am still here." She wrote, "I was never the problem." She closed the journal. She got up. She washed the cold teacup. She went to bed. She did not sleep easily. The mind, when it has been holding things for a long time, does not quiet quickly, just because you've decided to let them go. She lay in the dark and listened to the building and the city and the distant rain, and her thoughts moved through her, the way water moves through a landscape after a long freeze, finding channels, reshaping, going where it needed to go. She thought about Elise, about the 17 years of their friendship, the deep and layered thing that had held its shape under pressure. She thought about calling her in the morning. She thought about what it would feel like to tell the truth out loud to someone who already loved her. She thought about work, about the grant application she had due at the end of the month, about the family currently in the middle of a custody case she had been following for 3 weeks, whose outcome mattered to her in the specific and serious way that her work always mattered to her. She thought about Sunday. She had told Daniel she had plans of her own on Sunday. She hadn't, when she'd said it. It had been a true thing she had said, without knowing yet what it meant. She decided what it meant now. On Sunday, she would go to the museum. The small one on the east side that she had been meaning to visit since October, that had an exhibition of photographs she had read about and dog-eared in her memory and then never made time for, because there had always been brunch or dinner or someone else's schedule to fold herself into. She would go alone. She would take her time. She would stand in front of whatever moved her for as long as she wanted, without explaining to anyone why it moved her. And she would eat whatever she wanted for lunch. It was such a small thing, such an ordinary, unremarkable act of self-possession, a woman going to a museum on a Sunday. Nothing heroic about it, nothing grand. But Nora, lying in the dark with the rain against the window, felt the decision settle in her chest like something clicking into place. Like a lock that has been forced for months finally allowed to work the way it was designed. She was going to the museum on Sunday, and she was going to order her own lunch. She almost smiled. The rain came harder against the window. The building creaked. The city went on doing what cities do, relentless, enormous, indifferent, and alive. Nora pulled the blanket up. She closed her eyes, and then, just before sleep came, a thought moved through her, clear and simple and somehow larger than it had any right to be. She had not asked Daniel where Claire was now. She hadn't asked because it didn't matter. And it not mattering the way that question had simply failed to form, had offered itself, and been turned away at the door that felt like information. It felt like the beginning of something. Not healing, not yet. Not the clean upward arc of recovery that happens in stories when the protagonist finally understands. It was messier than that. Slower, more unglamorous. There were still hard phone calls ahead, still conversations she did not yet know how to begin, still mornings that would not be as still as this one. But something had shifted. She felt it the way you feel the first almost warmth in late February, not spring. Nothing so complete as spring, just the suggestion of it. Just the memory of what warmth felt like, returning at the very edges. She had stopped explaining herself. Not loudly, not with a speech or a confrontation or a moment of cinematic clarity. Just quietly, the way she had always done the most important things in her life. Quietly, and with great certainty, and all by herself. She had hung up the phone. She had written in her journal. She had decided about Sunday. And somewhere in the architecture of those 3 small acts, something in her had straightened. Something that had been bent for a long time had remembered its original shape. She did not know what came next. But for the first time in a very long time, she was not afraid of not knowing. She let herself sleep. And in the morning, the sky outside her window was still gray. January in the city is always gray, but there was something at the horizon. Something pale and barely there, but present. Something that had not been there the morning before. Nora stood at her kitchen window with her warm cup of coffee, and she looked at it. She did not know what Daniel would say when she was ready to speak to him again. She did not know what Elise would say when she told her the truth. She did not know how long this particular road was, or what it looked like at the end. But she knew this. She knew the 4 words she had written in her journal. She knew the 2 lines she had added last night. She knew that she was going to a museum on Sunday, alone, and she was going to take her time. And she knew with the quiet, unshakable certainty of a woman who is just beginning to remember who she is, that whatever happened next, she was not going to smooth it. She was not going to translate it. She was not going to make herself smaller to make room for someone else's version of who she was. She was Nora Callahan. She was 31 years old. She had bookshelves organized by feeling and plants in every window, and a yellow dish towel with embroidered daisies, and a dark green journal, and a museum to visit on Sunday. And she was, at last, exactly enough. But across the city, in an apartment she had never been to, a phone was ringing. And when it was answered, the voice on the other end said only 4 words. 4 words, in a voice she would later recognize. 4 words that would change the shape of everything she thought she had just understood. Before you go, I want to speak to you directly for a moment, because this episode was not just Nora's story. It was yours too, in the ways that matter. There is a kind of pain that doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, wearing the face of love, speaking gently, always giving you just enough to keep you from walking away. And the cruelest part of that kind of pain is that it teaches you to doubt yourself. It takes the most honest parts of you, your clarity, your preferences, your knowledge of what you need, and it renames them problems. It calls your self-knowledge difficult. It calls your boundaries a lot. It calls your dignity exhausting. And if you hear it long enough, in soft enough a voice, you start to agree. Nora stopped agreeing. Not perfectly, not all at once, not with a speech, or a gesture, or a single moment of transformation. She stopped agreeing the way real people stop agreeing, slowly, painfully, in the dark, in a journal, at a kitchen sink, with cold tea and a yellow dish towel and a decision about Sunday. The second lesson from this episode is this: you do not need to explain yourself to people who have already decided who you are. Explanation in those rooms is not communication. It is performance. And you were never meant to perform your own existence. And the third thing, the most important thing, is something Nora is only beginning to learn, and that you may be only beginning to learn too. Being known is not the same as being understood, and being loved is not the same as being seen. You deserve to be seen. In part 3, Nora will face what those 4 words mean. She will stand in the middle of a truth she did not expect, and she will have to decide not just what she does next, but who she decides to be now, after everything. With full knowledge, without the comfort of not knowing. That episode will be the hardest, and it will be the most beautiful. Don't look away.